Welcome to Om Times TV, a division of Om Times Media and Broadcasting.
One concept I like to talk about is grief when it comes to bodies. I think that is a topic in the body positivity world that people don't like to talk about because body positivity tends to be slightly toxic positivity, like just love your body. But if you have an autoimmune disorder, and a lot of times, most of the time, people can't see, so an invisible diagnosis, and sometimes even worse, right? Because nobody believes you and you just feel so alone.
Cue music. Places, everybody places. We're starting in 3, 2.
Welcome to the Autoimmune Hour, where we look at the rise of autoimmune disorders. I've brought together top experts that range from doctors, specialists, nutritionists, researchers, and even those recovering from autoimmune to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information about autoimmunity and how to live your life uninterrupted.
Thank you for joining us here on the Autoimmune Hour with Sharon Sayler. Always seek sound legal, medical, and or professional advice regarding any problems, conditions, and any of the recommendations you see, hear, or read here on the Autoimmune Hour, Understanding Autoimmune, and Life Interrupted Radio. Join the Autoimmune Hour's Courage Club. Sign up now at understandingautoimmune.com. Now, back to your host, Sharon Sayler.
Welcome, everyone, to the Autoimmune Hour. I'm Sharon Sayler from SharonSayler.com, and as always, it's my honor and pleasure to be with you here on another brand new episode. And I'm so excited because we have a return guest, Amanda Mittman, and she's all about eating and eating disorders and disordered eating and all of that. And I love her perspective on it because one of the things that happened to me early on was I was told I had a lot of food sensitivities. And sometimes when you're in the throes of a flare or whatever, you can take that to the extreme and be avoiding way too much food, which leads to nutrition problems. So we're going to talk to Amanda about dealing with that. Let me read her bio for you. I'm going to bring it up so I can read her bio. Amanda Mittman, she is the founder of Happy Valley Nutrition, and she shared with me that to many, I look great on the outside. I was praised for losing weight and being so disciplined. Family and friends called me an inspiration. I had changed careers to become a registered dietitian because telling people what to eat made me feel so powerful. I found that just such a disarmingly honest way to look at things and self-reflection. But inside, she was self-destructing. Her eating disorder was fueling her life, and she had disordered eating and orthorexia and felt her life was consumed by a desperate search for perfection. And after that, she took control of her life, and I'm just bravo to that. And she committed to learning more about nutrition and became a licensed registered dietitian, as well as the numerous other accolades here. I could go on and on. And then she opened Happy Valley Nutrition to where people who've been through the ringer and are searching for alternate ways of living a fuller life without shame or self-abuse, especially around what we eat. So welcome, Amanda. Thanks for being on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me back. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, and I'm thrilled because our first time was like, I think the title was something like, is your healthy food making you sick? And part of my premise there was about the early stages of my autoimmune. My food restrictions came down to about 10 foods. And through your advice and great ideas, it became, you told me to trust myself, basically. And I love that. So I wanted to share with them all about your ideas on what is intuitive eating and how intuitive eating works, especially when we're maybe told about food sensitivities or other things that can be darn right scary.
And again, thank you for having me. And I want to just say, yeah, it can be really downright scary, especially if perhaps there are foods that you have eaten just fine before and all of a sudden reacting, or you react to a few foods and then you say, I'm going to just cut this, and this out, or you haven't had any reactions to food, but what you've read about in groups is like cut out all sugar or all this or all these sort of things. And so we just take them all out. And so I see that a lot. And what I also see is that, sure, like a lot of these are intolerances and allergies and people feel better when they're not eating them. But what I also see is that people are very afraid to add foods back in, like you just said, right? Once we've taken them out, there's safety in that. Okay, I'm not eating something that might harm me, but I've seen it so many times where it just becomes way too restrictive. So for an example, I have a client, one of my favorite clients. I love her. She had some health issues and she went to a provider who said, cut out everything basically. And she was eating like 6 or 7 foods as
Oh,
well.
been there, done that.
Yes. And it was so restrictive. And she did this for a good long while. I was so impressed with her that she lasted this long because most people don't. So she had this very restrictive diet. She lost a lot of weight, of course. And then it just started becoming harder and harder to maintain this very restrictive way of eating. So she would binge on sugar or eat all the cookies, and that breeds so much shame. And so she came to me like off the heels of this really restrictive place and feeling very out of control with food. And so our work together has been, well, what does work for you? What doesn't work for you? And how do we find something that feels a little more balanced, inclusive, and joyful? It doesn't feel so restrictive and punitive.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes you get multiple doctors telling you multiple things. I remember I went to one specialist and they said no oxalates. So that cut out things like spinach and kale. I go to another specialist and they said no lectins. And so there goes all the beans. And
Right.
yeah, so it got crazy for me too. And part of it was slightly intuitive. Part of it, I was feeling a little bit better. The inflammation seemed less. So part of me, so maybe this is working, but gosh, I cannot be getting all the nutrients I need if I'm not eating the whole list, like nightshades, the lectins, the oxalates. And I'm just like, holy moly.
I think such an important part is mental health in all of this. We as a community and in general just try to forget that our mental health is pretty much everything. And so if you're on this really restrictive diet and you're miserable, like my client, right? She was miserable and her mental health and she was depressed, like all that. What is health then? That's what I always ask everybody. What does health mean to you? And you could be eating a really restrictive diet, but feel so miserable and unhappy about it and not be able to go out and eat with friends or go to a restaurant or really lose a big portion of your life from it. Is that worth it? Is it worth it? And maybe it is, or maybe there are things that we can do to ease the restrictions a little bit so that you could feel like you have a little bit more wiggle room in your diet. But I argue sometimes, I know that sometimes providers will like, yeah, don't do this. And then another one says this. So now you have you have 4 different providers telling you their own opinion. And then you're left with 6 foods. And then your mental health really suffers. And so I just to ask my clients, is this worth it? Does this feel like something you can do in the long term? Does this feel like it's okay for right now? How are we going to work on expanding this? Because there's no way you could live on 6 foods and be nutritionally sound.
And not only be nutritionally sound, but I'm glad you brought up the idea of mental health because there's so much that happens around food. Going out on an evening with friends and family members and holidays, and food is not just tied to nutrition. Obviously, that's important. But you bring up a good point because I know when I was limited down to that tiny handful of foods, going out to dinner with friends was a nightmare. And then they were equally uncomfortable because I wasn't eating anything. Even though I'd say, no, I'm happy I ate at home, I'll just have tea. But it really destroyed everybody's momentary mental health right then and there because they're worried about me not eating and they're uncomfortable eating in front of me and I'm uncomfortable smelling all the foods that I quote unquote can't have.
It's a both and I get that. And of course there are going to be times where I have to do this. This is a therapeutic diet. I need to cut these out. Maybe going out to eat isn't the best thing for me right now. Maybe it's can I have friends over and do the cooking so that I can feel safe in my home with the foods that I'm eating, but still enjoy the company of others. But I've been there too, in terms of back in the day, I used to do a lot of detoxes, but that was like my own eating disorder, quite honestly, driving that. I used to go to dinner, like at a pasta Italian restaurant, people getting big things of delicious things. And I'd get like a plain chicken breast with a side of broccoli. And that felt, I did it because I wanted to, but like that felt hard. And I could see other people were like, what's wrong with her? It sets up a little bit of an awkward dynamic, but if you're someone that needs to follow that, perhaps that's not the avenue to go down in this moment to eat out. But again, I think just continuing to ask yourself, why am I restricting these foods? am I restricting any of these foods based on fear? Like am I restricting any of these foods because I'm afraid to gain weight if I add them back in? And what would it be like to add in a little more variety?
Wow, there's so many questions floating in my head, and one of the I'll save that tangential one for after the commercial break, but there's so many questions going in my head. I love the idea of intuitive eating. And is there a way to know which one, maybe there is a food like gluten sensitivity is a real thing. I'm not saying the others aren't real things, guys. I'm just going from off the top of my head. Are there tests that people can take to find out, like, okay, that is causing you inflammation and that is one particular item you should stay away from?
I don't put stock into allergy testing. Allergy testing at the allergist, yes, like skin prick testing where it's like a true allergy. That's like the IgE test, right? That's like the true allergy. I do
Right.
not put any weight into the IgG testing because I've seen it with clients. One, it tells you all these foods that you need to cut out. Often it's a reflection on foods that you've recently eaten. It changes. And I just find, again, especially with the clients that I work with who have some sort of history of disordered eating or an eating disorder, it just further fuels that. If they want to get those testing done, that's like totally fine. It's not usually covered by insurance, and even the like Academy of Allergies does not stand behind those testing. But if you want to do, that's totally fine. But I really feel like it's your own lived experience of, okay, when I eat tomatoes, I have acid reflux later. Okay, maybe tomatoes are something to cut out, right? Or I just noticed that, oh, I'm a little constipated after I eat gluten, or after I have dairy, these are very general. I had milk and then I had diarrhea. It's like, okay, maybe you're lactose intolerant. Let's explore a little. So I do find that you have to play around with it, and it's more like symptom based than perhaps those tests that you can get. And I know there are a lot of people that say don't have any sugar, don't have any of this, don't have any of that. But what I have seen working with like hundreds and hundreds of people is that it is not realistic for people to never have sugar, to never have any of those things. And what happens is people cut it out and they do it for a certain period of time. And then they see some chocolate, or it's Mother's Day or it's Valentine's Day and it's time. And then they have some sugar and the floodgates open and they can't stop eating it and they binge, and then they think they're addicted to sugar, and then we start the cycle again. And I know because I was in that cycle for decades, and it's maddening talking about on this mental health path. My mental health was awful. I was in a thin body, but my mental health sucked, and I was being healthy, quote unquote, right? Healthy. So I think you really need to, again, think about, okay, if I cut this out, what is that going to look like for me? How am I going to be able to add that back in, and not make these declarative statements of I'm never going to have sugar again if you're not feeling any symptoms from it, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does make
I just don't see it playing out in real life. It sounds great. I'm never going to have sugar again. It's inflaming, all this stuff. I'm never going to eat it, but it's not realistic.
That's so true. So many other things come to play. So how do you define intuitive eating? Let's get into the nuts and bolts of intuitive eating now that I've sort of vented my frustration around food.
It is frustrating. I just want to validate that. Like, food is frustrating, and because there's so much emotion wrapped in it, right? And there's experiences and culture and tradition, and every experience that we have in life, whether it's a funeral or a wedding or a celebration or whatever, when we get together, it involves food. So it's not like this new, completely neutral thing that has no story around it. There's so much. And also food can be our identity as well. I make my living off of talking about food and bodies and things like that. But intuitive eating, certainly did not coin the term. And I'm sure if you're on social media or read things, you might have heard that term. That intuitive eating was created by two registered dietitians from California. They wrote the book in 1990s. So there's a book, they're on the 4th edition. I wonder if I have it here. No, I have it somewhere else. It's created in the 1990s. It's called Intuitive Eating. And the reason why they made this book, or this kind of way of eating, is because they're weight loss dietitians, as most dietitians who go to school are taught to be. And so they would be doing weight loss counseling with their clients. Clients would go off, do the thing. And then what would happen is the client eventually would come back to them and say, I did everything you said, but it's not working, or I'm gaining the weight, or I'm binging, all those sorts of things. So both of them, they worked in the same building, saw that same pattern happening. And they're like, if all these other people are having these experiences and we're the common denominator, something's going on with the way that we're talking about food. And so what they decided to do was go away from this weight dieting paradigm and create intuitive eating, which is a self-care framework through body and food. So really the whole purpose is to start to heal your relationship with food and your body. And you don't get to the end of the book and you're like, I am an intuitive eater, right? It is a lifelong process. It involves 10 principles, starting with ditching diet culture and the diet mentality. And there's honoring hunger, understanding fullness. So there's a hunger fullness scale, talks about movement and body image. And then the last piece, which really goes with what we're talking about. So after you do all of that work, the last piece is gentle nutrition. Only after someone has really found their way with intuitive eating do we start talking about, okay, so if you had 2 pieces of bread, one was whole wheat and one was white, maybe we choose the whole wheat because there's more fiber and more nutrients in the whole wheat over the white bread. But we can't talk about that in the beginning because most of us are so ingrained to pick the whole wheat because it's healthier for us, right? And so again, intuitive eating really teaches us to eat what feels good, what feels satisfying. And that does mean eating foods that have previously been off limits. Yeah, that's just a little buzz about what intuitive eating is. It's wonderful, and it can be helpful for a lot of people.
I love the idea of it. One question came up for me, though. If you've been indoctrinated like I was for all of those years about you can only have these certain foods, there was a lot of emotion that came up about fear, I guess would be a better word. Okay, I like the concept. I like the idea. I think it makes more sense. I knew all the facts. And yet there was still a sort of this fear. Oh my goodness, are there certain markers? How would I know? How would I know, say, even just eating bread? Maybe we'll go back to this idea that gluten, because that's a common thing people say, gluten-free now. Are there things like, I know you said there are certain symptoms that we watch for. How fast did those happen? Would one piece of bread cause something, or?
No, I mean, I think some symptoms can be pretty immediate and some symptoms can take days to settle in. And so when we remove foods or we add foods back in, we typically do it one at a time and we wait a few days. So I wouldn't say, okay, take everything out. Let's see what affects you. Sometimes you could take things out and then add them back in, but I typically like to do one food at a time. So let's remove gluten. Let's take it out for gluten you have to do a little bit longer, but let's take it out for 4 to 6 weeks, see how you feel, and then let's add it back in. What symptoms are you noticing? So really it's that removing and introduction. And again, it's not always, you're not gonna eat that piece of bread maybe and feel awful. It might come, if at all, later the day or maybe a couple days later. So you can't really do too many different foods at the same time.
Yeah.
And so that is knowing your body and knowing what when your body is working well, right? Being intuitive about how do I feel when I feel like things are working and humming? And how do I feel when things don't feel right? And I think that's important. And that's hard for some people to drop down from their head into your body, right? A lot of that. And most of us are completely detached from our bodies. And so it can be helpful to work with someone for them to walk you through, okay, these are some of the things you might experience. Because again, it can be very difficult for people to even know if something is causing a reaction or not.
That was my next question because okay, if it's not immediate, okay, that's great because then it's not a serious or like an anaphylaxis type of thing. So let's say 72 hours later, I wake up and I'm fatigued, I'm achy, I'm this, and I'm thinking it may have been that piece of bread, or what else have I eaten in the following 72 hours that the response is more immediate. So I could see where someone guiding you through this would be very important to be able to figure it out. And remember the first time I reintroduced a food, and it did cause a response the next day. I noticed more fatigue, I noticed more tiredness and everything. And it was really interesting that when I was talking to my provider, it was about, Oh, that's a good sign, because now we know that your inflammation has gone so low that when we introduced that, it caused some inflammation. But that's okay, because you were aware of it. There was all these positive things, even though that day I felt crummy. But I was encouraged that I was aware of it, and my body was telling me, like, okay, maybe not this one. Let's try something else.
Yeah, that's great. Your body spoke and you were able to hear it. And sometimes we can't, and sometimes we don't know. That's the truth of the matter, is sometimes foods do not cause a reaction. They might not be like not in like we might not know. We might not know, is gluten the thing that's doing it? I don't know. Is dairy the thing that's doing it? I don't know. Or the nightshades doing it? I can't tell. And so I say, all right, so what is this doing for you? Maybe we need to add it back in to give you, again, a little bit more variety, so you're not suffering with just grilled chicken breasts and broccoli, to give you a little bit more. And then we can always try and play again with it later.
If someone is experiencing that, are there certain common ideas about reintroducing a food? Do you just introduce it once, or do you introduce it over a period of time? How do you reintroduce a food?
So I have to be honest, this is not typically what I do anymore, what I specialize in anymore. I used to do more kind of allergy, more I work now more with people in terms of psychology around nutrition, in terms of like body image, disordered eating, and that sort of stuff. But in terms of, I might not be the end all be all expert on this, but typically we just remove one thing at a time. We wait a week. It depends. Gluten is a little bit longer, and then we introduce it back. And if people are like, I don't really know if it did anything, then you can always take it back out again and then reintroduce it again. And it can be really helpful to keep a food and symptom journal of, oh, I had gluten today, I added it back in, and I'm going to be really vigilant and a little bit of hyper awareness around how I feel. Oh, I noticed that I was really tired the next day. Okay, good to know. And maybe you pull it back out again, or maybe you keep it in to see how you feel on it. So I don't really get the sense that there is a right and wrong way to do it, but whatever you need to do to, again, you have to take it out and then add it back in to see the effect, if there is an effect. And if there is no effect, then I say keep it in. If you feel fine, you don't notice any different, I'm all about keeping as many foods in your diet as possible.
No, absolutely. I want to circle back to this idea, though, that a lot of times people with autoimmune, and for a while I was saying it too, so it's a common term, like you feel like your body betrayed you, which is a real emotional thing. And learning to be kind to ourselves is really sometimes difficult when you're feeling different reactions to things, including feeling the loss of eating or the loss of being in your mind, being able to eat whatever you want. So what tips do you have for people who are like still beating themselves up over maybe even just the plain old diagnosis? How did I get here? Besides, now my eating is disordered on top of the other symptoms and the other diagnosis.
Yeah. Oh, first of all, I want to offer like tons of compassion, and that must be really hard. And I also want to, if people have therapists or support that they can talk to, because one of my first questions I always ask people when they have a new diagnosis is, what was it like for you to get that diagnosis? For some people, it's, oh, thank God, I've been having these symptoms and now there's a name for it. Or, oh my God, I'm so glad the blood test showed up. And sometimes there isn't a name for it, and I'm not feeling well, but I know that I'm not well. So I just want to, one, offer compassion, and two, make sure that you have space to talk about what it's like to have that diagnosis and to find support. One concept I like to talk about is grief when it comes to bodies, body grief. And I think that is a topic in the body positivity world that people don't like to talk about, because body positivity tends to be slightly toxic positivity, like just love your body, right? But if you have an autoimmune disorder, and a lot of times, most of the time, people can't see, right? You're not looking sick. Oh, absolutely. An invisible diagnosis, invisible condition that's sometimes even worse, right? Because nobody believes you and you just feel so alone. But I want to bring up this concept of grief around the diagnosis, grief around perhaps you're on a medication and it's changed your body. Perhaps you have to be on a restrictive therapeutic diet for whatever reason and your body is changing, or perhaps you're not and you've gained weight, like whatever that looks like. I want to bring in this concept because I don't think we talk about it enough in our culture, right? Like what happens if like a family member, you're working and a family member dies, right? You get 2 days off of work and then you're expected to go back and continue. Nothing ever happened. And that is not fair. And that is not how emotions work. So I like talking about this concept of grief because, and I also call it sitting in the suck, right? So you're sitting in the suck of, man, I just got this diagnosis and this feels really hard. Or, oh my God, like this feels like a life sentence. What am I going to do? If we don't also honor the fact that there is sadness and sorrow and grief in here, we are missing a really large part of it. And this journey, just like any sort of body image story, is very up and down. There are moments where we're like, I feel okay, right? I feel okay in this here and now body. But there might be moments where, gosh, it feels really hard today. I don't feel well. I feel tired. I feel sick. I don't like the way my body is changing. That is all valid and true. So I want to say, if you're someone who feels that or has those moments, that is normal.
Which got me to thinking about the time I went to my rheumatologist for a checkup, and I was doing overall pretty good. I was pretty pleased, except I was having trouble sleeping. And I said to the rheumatologist what was going on. And she said, and bless her heart, but it hit hard. It was there was some grief in it. She says, Sharon, that could be menopause. It may not be your autoimmune. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, great. Now I'm dealing with two things.
Yeah.
There was a lot of shock and grief in that idea. Yes, women your age. I knew that. I knew it was all coming. But someone brings it and sets it right in front of you. You have to deal with it.
Yeah, it's really hard. And things like, I have 2 feet squarely planted in perimenopause right now, which is a wild and wacky time for sure. And you have no control over it, really. Your body is going to continue to age, right? And there is nothing we can do. And so there is this lack of control that we have. Like, my body shape is changing. It is. My stomach is getting thicker. It's the gym feels harder, right? Like it changes. And what happens when things are changing and there's nothing that we can do, right? Or like you're in menopause, like nothing you can do about that, is we try and control other things. Disordered eating and eating disorders tends to spike during life's transitions. In puberty, after having a child, things like that. Perimenopause, middle age, women in middle age, eating disorders, they spike. And I see this all the time in my practice because, again, we have a changing body. Society dictates that it shouldn't change. It's not supposed to change, judging by all the celebrities we see, that their bodies stay the same. So your body, we're told it's not supposed to change. And we're told if it does change, it needs to look a certain way, but not that way, right? You can't let your belly get bigger. And so then we have the supplements and the companies and the foods and the this and the that. And yeah, because we feel like we can control that and we can't. And then it gets us into trouble. And so I see this really directed towards, and it can be pretty challenging for people to navigate.
Oh, yes. And I'm thinking that women in midlife are usually the ones statistically that are getting diagnosed with an autoimmune condition on top of it all.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So we're there in your shoes where you have your autoimmune, maybe it's a newer diagnosis, or you have your autoimmune and you're also going through hormonal changes in addition, which make you feel completely bonkers on their own. And so that is tough. That is life-changing. That is isolating. And there's grief in that.
How do you have any tips on grief? Are there suggestions for dealing with it? Because the one phrase that I get tired of hearing, and I'm sure it's hard to dissociate if this, then that, but the one phrase I get tired of hearing is women your age. And so what? Just let me be. My brain still thinks it's 21. Let it go.
Yeah. And the listeners, they didn't see my eyes rolling into the back of my head when you said that. So I think coping skills comes in handy, and coping looks like something different to everybody. And so when I say coping, okay, so let's say you're having a bad body day, whatever that looks like to you. Like for me, it might be like, I don't like the way I look today, right? I just feel down about my body. And so really when that happens, because it's going to, right? The goal isn't to never have distressing body thoughts, because that's always going to happen. You're always going to have distressing body thoughts from time to time. But really the goal is, how do I care for myself when that happens? So one thing I do, I'll back up. The first question I ask is, what else is going on in my life right now? Because the body is the perfect place to put all your problems. It's the perfect scapegoat, because for those of us who have really hated our body for a long period of time, it is much easier to place the hate on our body than actually deal with perhaps what is actually happening in our life. So for example, if I'm feeling really stressed out or out of control, I don't have control over something in life, then I typically like to put that on my body. And so I might ask myself, okay, is this what's really going on here? Is this with your body, or is there something else happening outside your body that is feeling difficult? So that's the first question I'll ask. And then the second thing is the coping, right? And it's so interesting when I ask people, what do you do to cope? People are like, I don't have any coping skills. And if you're someone who sees a therapist, it's a wonderful thing to talk about with your therapist about what are some different ways to cope. It doesn't necessarily mean taking a bath and going for a walk, although that can be helpful. Maybe it's saying no and putting up more boundaries and creating more space in your life. Maybe it's like giving up some things that aren't serving you. Maybe in that moment, you have some positive self-talk. Maybe there's some coping that's based in action, right? And so maybe I'm going to go do the laundry. I'm going to do something task-oriented, right? Just to get myself out of that kind of sucky place. So I think it's important to figure out what coping looks like to you. What do you need? What am I feeling? And then what do I need?
I'm so glad you said laundry. I'm not the only one that finds
I love
laundry
laundry.
relaxing.
I love it. I don't like to fold it. And it's funny, like I will load the dishwasher, but I hate taking the dishes out. And I will do the laundry, but I'm not the biggest folder. But it is relaxing and it's task oriented, right? And so sometimes they'll say, take a bubble bath or meditate. But sometimes sitting in silence and in action, I know that meditation is action, but sitting still does not feel good to our nervous system. And so for me, sometimes I have a little nervous energy. So I need to go do something. I need to go complete a task. And that kind of helps me cope. And maybe I'm still having distressing body thoughts, and maybe it's not as distressing. Maybe it's come down a couple of notches so that I can then go about my day.
I also think I'm moving about with the laundry. I'm moving about with the vacuuming. Now I know it's not the gym, but I'm actually some steps, shall we say.
100. It's movement is movement. That counts. That absolutely counts. And maybe going to the gym or move. For me, like when I was going through a period of time where I was anxious, like every day and waking up anxious, it was awful. I walked a lot, not to burn calories or whatever, but I just couldn't sit still. And so I just would anytime I had a break, I'd go outside. I think also being outside was helpful. Hearing the birds, being around nature, some fresh air. I just walked and walked. And that's just what I did. And I don't do it like that much anymore. But in that moment, when I asked my body, what do you need? It would always answer, we just need to move somewhere. We just need to go outside.
Mine is if getting to that really stressed out state, my body, I don't even have to ask. I just know, take it to the beach and you'll feel better.
I love that. I wish we had a beach day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. I was looking out the window. We definitely do not have any water around here, but that's so good to know. And I think asking yourself, if you don't know what are the things that really help you, I know for an instant, I know the things that help, make a list or keep a list, because again, you're going to have some times where you want to be still and quiet. You might have some time where you just need to dissociate on your phone or binge some Netflix. And then you might have some time where you feel you want to be more connected to outside or nature or call a friend or whatever. So that's all part of being intuitive, right? Knowing what your body needs, what you need to do to soothe yourself in that moment.
Although there's a part that is outside the intuitive part, because my family members know that about me too. And sometimes before I'm noticing it, they'll say, you need to take yourself to the beach. You need a beach day.
Is that helpful for you? Is that helpful?
Oh, yeah.
Or sometimes,
I don't find it insulting. They say it from love. This is not, grumbling or like, you're too cranky, go to the beach.
Right.
No, this is like, oh, you've been busy, you need to slow down, take yourself to the beach.
Yeah.
So I can understand how sometimes people say, don't tell me what to do, but that I know with my family members, this is absolutely just noticing it.
They know you.
Notice it. They know me well.
Yeah, they know you so well. And also you are allowed to set a boundary of your information isn't helpful right now. No, thank you. I'm gonna take some time to figure out what does work for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about boundaries a little bit. It is hard sometimes to know. I can tell some family members that I am coping too well, shall we say, and they'll want to encourage me to at times to slow down or things like that. It's a little hard to balance that idea of that. Sometimes I want to push through. I want to get this project done, whatever it is, because I know I'll have more time if I'm on the other side of it to absolutely unwind. That if I unwind now, I really won't be unwinding because my brain will still be figuring it out. So let's talk
Yeah.
about these kinds of boundaries.
I love a good boundary. They're so hard we should be learning how to set boundaries like in elementary school because these are things that like I learned how to do, and I'm a work in progress with boundaries as like an internal people pleaser. It is hard to set boundaries and I'm really trying, but especially around bodies, because people just love to say some stuff about your body sometimes, right? Oh, I noticed that you lost some weight, or oh, did you gain some weight? People feel like our bodies are able to be commented upon, and they are absolutely not. You do not deserve to have your body commented on if that is not something that you want. Most of the people I work with do not want anybody noticing or talking about their bodies. And so I think being able to say to someone like, this is what I used to say. Well, my grandmother, she passed away at almost 103. And every time she used to I used to come in and she'd be like, your arms got so fat. Okay. And she's 100. She's fine. She loves me. Whatever. But I would say, I'm not talking about my body. I just would shut it down. And she never got the hint because every time I saw her, she would talk about my arms. But I'm like, I'm not talking about this. Right. And so even just saying, I'm not having this conversation, or I don't talk about my body. And even if you've never said that before and you're like, oh, hey, I want to set this new boundary, you are always allowed to do that. Another thing is just change the topic. Oh, hey, yeah. Like someone says, oh, wow, it looks like you gained a little weight. Yeah, look, it's so nice outside, right? Or oh, tell me what's going on with you, right? Changing the topic. And even saying my body is like the least interesting thing about me. And I'm just not I don't talk about other people's bodies. And so I think, again, if you're someone who's experiencing body changes because of your autoimmune condition or anything like that, and you're feeling vulnerable and scared to see other people or have people comment, just having a line in the back of your head, what are you going to say to someone? Yep, I'm fine. I'm taking care of myself. Thank you for your concern. Changing the topic. But it's really hard to do. And the other thing is you're probably going to have to keep enforcing the boundary. You said it once, but then you have to keep reinforcing it. And that can feel painful to have to keep doing so much labor to reinforce a boundary, and hopefully people get it in the long run. Or you're also allowed to perhaps, like, if Uncle Joe always says something about your weight or makes a comment, don't go to anywhere where Uncle Joe is if you can help it. Like, you're allowed to say no to things if that feels like it's not going to be a good place for you to be.
I've run into people who say, though, it's saying no was more painful. How do we get through that part of the people pleaser, as you mentioned, the pain of putting up with the comment versus the internal struggle I have with myself and saying no? I could see that could be quite difficult.
Yeah, I'm still figuring that out myself. I am a recovering people pleaser, right? That's why I said setting boundaries can be really nerve-wracking and scary for me. But what I noticed is, like, when I started setting little boundaries, like start small, or hey, I'm not going to talk about that, when nobody got mad at me and nobody blew up at me and nobody was like, you are an awful person, I was like, oh man, okay, nothing really happened. And the only thing that happened is I feel really proud that I stuck to something, that I honored myself. And so I realized that, like, setting a boundary is something that is helpful not only to me but to the other person, because I am helping I'm teaching the other person how to act around me. Right. And so I'm not nasty when I set boundaries, or nope, I can't see you tomorrow. I can't see you tomorrow. I have time in a couple of weeks, right? Like, gently setting boundaries. And I've never had anybody ever get mad at me for setting a boundary, if I'm kind about it and clear about it.
Yeah. This brings me to this part of the stories we tell ourselves. This is fascinating. So the stories we tell ourselves around food, the stories we tell ourselves around boundaries.
100%. You're so right. And this is the type of conversation I have with my clients, right? That's why people call it nutrition therapy, because we're not just talking about fruits and vegetables and all that sort of stuff. Boundaries often come into my conversation because I think, especially if we're people who have dieted for a long time, we are very boundaried. because we're like, we can only eat this, not that, right? This is healthy, this is unhealthy, and they're too rigid. So in that case, we need to expand the boundaries a little bit about what we're eating. But in other ways, we need to set up boundaries to preserve our space, especially, again, if we have a changing body and our body's getting larger and we feel uncomfortable, or we're around family members or people. It's just a good skill. And again, if you're someone who works with a therapist, I always love for my clients to work with a mental health provider. This, again, is something really important to talk about. And also the question of like, why is it so hard for me to set a boundary? For me, it was always like, they're going to hate me, they're going to get mad at me, and nobody's going to like me, and everyone's going to leave. And that hasn't happened yet. So
that's fascinating.
yeah.
I've been mesmerized, everyone here. I blew past the quick commercial break. We need to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Amanda Mittman more about, I thought we were talking about nutrition, but it actually seems so intertwined with our whole life. So we'll be back to get more of life skills and nutrition. We'll be right back.
The Autoimmune Hour will return after these messages from our sponsors. It's great sponsors like these that keep this show coming to you every week. Be sure and stop by understandingautoimmune.com to learn more.
Times TV. Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Autoimmune Hour. I'm here with Amanda Mittman, and she's the founder of Happy Valley Nutrition. And her clinic is an entirely different way to view nutrition, and that's what I love about it. Today, we're talking about intuitive eating and all sorts of other things, because I realized during our conversations, that Amanda's been on before, our conversations, that eating is so intertwined with everything, how we view the world, how we socialize, everything like that. Amanda, we've been talking about amazing things like boundaries and food sensitivities and dealing with all those sorts of things. One of the things, though, how do we come to terms with our own body? I love the idea of boundaries. We're telling Uncle Joe, back off, dude. And Amanda was much politer, wasn't she?
I'm someone who cusses and swears a lot. So I reined that in for you, Sharon.
I can understand boundaries are about myself, yes, and the other person. But what if my internal dialogue is still saying, oh, Uncle Joe is right. My midsection's gotten pretty big, or Aunt Bertha, she's right. When my book came out 14 years ago, I think now, I got the weirdest email from someone. I had one of those pictures taken where they superimpose your book and your arms are up on the book and you got your chin on your hands. And so this woman wrote me an email and said, you've got the girthiest arms. And at the time, I didn't have girthy arms. I didn't even know what girthy arms are. Someone I didn't even know. But for a while, it really made me self-conscious of my arms. So how do we respect ourselves, and what kinds of... I love the idea of setting boundaries outside, but maybe sometimes when I get those stories in my head, they start playing out themselves.
Absolutely. That's wild, by the way. That is the weirdest comment, and like the most Interesting choice of adjectives. That is wild. I'm so
And I
sorry
don't
that
even,
happened.
it had
And
nothing to do with the book. My book would had nothing to do
right,
with girthy
right.
or non-girthy or ungirthy arms.
Yeah, and but what you said is these comments stay with us because it feels so vulnerable to be noticed. And also it's very vulnerable to put yourself out there, right? Just like showing up in life can feel vulnerable. And so how do we, when we have these thoughts, right? Like how do we get out from them? Because sometimes it feels like we're spiraling, right? It feels okay. I have girthy arms. Yeah, yes, I guess arms are the theme here, right? Like my arms are fat, my arms are girthy, whatever that meant, whatever that means. Oh my gosh, I haven't been to the gym very much. I've let myself go. I'm pulling the thread here. And this is what I do in session with people a little more slowly. Okay, so
So we
what does
really
that mean?
want to pull the thread on the girthy part. Now it
Yes.
is 14 years
Yeah.
later, and women my age, anyway, starting to get the loose skin on the arms. And it's like,
Yeah, exactly. It's not fair. And there's the grief, right? That's not fair. That
Yep.
like my arms are changing and my skin is changing in this way. And this is just what happens, right? That really sucks. It feels really hard to exist in this body today, in this moment.
It's like
And
you don't know your
okay,
body anymore.
yeah,
You don't know your body
yeah,
anymore
I
after an
do.
autoimmune diagnosis. And then you go through life's normal changes, and you're like, okay, I was coming to terms with knowing my body and dealing with the autoimmune condition. But now it's changing in other ways that have nothing to do with that. It's just you don't know your body anymore. It's where am
Yeah.
I? Who is this?
Yes, absolutely. And so we've talked about just previously here of how do we drop down and get to know our body, right? Like you're in a relationship with your body, and relationships take work and relationships change, right? Like the type of relationship, if you have a loved one or a spouse or even a friend, right? That beginning stage is like super fun and exciting. And then the longer you stay, you're like, okay, this is different, right? This is a new stage. It's the same thing with our body. And so whether it's an autoimmune diagnosis, whether it's the fact that you're going in your midlife and your body is changing, it seems every day, right? And it can feel really hard and painful and challenging and distressing, but it's a new opportunity for us to say, okay, what does a relationship with my here and now body actually look like? What would a relationship with my body with an autoimmune condition look like? What does it need to look like? What do I need to do to take care of it? And just knowing that actually takes work. Just like we put in work to relationships, we go to couples therapy, right? We shower each other with gifts and frank conversations. Same thing that needs to happen with your body, because we are in a relationship with it. There are going to be days in your relationship that really suck. And there are going to be days in your relationship that feel absolutely wonderful. And most of it is everywhere in between. And I think just when you're having those kind of distressing moments of just being like, okay, this will pass. It's okay. The other question is like, what meaning am I making out of this? Okay, so if this is swirling around in my head, you have girthy arms, what meaning am I making out of it? For you, there was, I'm sad because I'm in menopause now. Like, and that felt really hard. Or my body is changing. Okay, what is that? What else? Like we follow the automatic thought down a little bit. And then we ask ourselves, is it true? Do I really believe it? Do I really believe that my body is not worthy or I'm going to die alone? Does this align with my values? Quite often it doesn't. And then we say, okay, so like, how do we change that? And so sometimes it can be a helpful statement to say, I am feeling, and you make it up, like what you make it up that feels good for you, but it feels really hard to be in my body right now. And I know that one day I'm going to feel better. Or it feels really distressing to live in my body. It feels really uninhabitable, right? It feels not safe to be in my body. And I stand in hope that one day it will feel better. And so having that both and statement of, yeah, I'm going to acknowledge that like things feel really bad right now. And again, not this toxic positivity, but and I have hope, or and I'm still a worthy human being. And I'm just as worthy after my diagnosis than I was before my diagnosis. Holding that both and can be helpful.
I love that. I learned that in improv class years ago, that one of the 4 components of improv is
Yes. Yes, and I love it. So I'm feeling bad in my body. Yes, and what are we going to do about it? Maybe there's nothing to do. Maybe it's okay. You have permission to feel like crap in your body. But maybe there's, yes, I feel like crap in my body. And maybe tomorrow won't be so bad. Or maybe I can take a rest or go for a walk or go to the beach and I'll feel better. Right. So yeah, I love the and.
Yeah, I love the and too. It's so funny that you bring that up. I don't believe I've ever used that with myself, but I'm thinking about in my communications coaching world, I use yes and all the time to help people reframe whatever's going on with them or with their team or with the situation. Yes and. Oh my gosh. So we can use that on ourselves. It's a duh.
Absolutely. Yeah, we definitely can, because sometimes we don't have anybody else to have a conversation with. And so you could even journal it out and write it down, right? Yes, and write something down. When I know in improv, they've like, and yes, and right, they keep going with it. And that could be something that you keep exploring. And I call it like pulling the thread a little bit and seeing where we can get to.
Absolutely. And now we're just about out of time. I want people to know, how can they find out more about you and Happy Valley Nutrition?
You can go to our website, which is happyvalleynutrition.com. And there's also like a contact me through the website that goes directly to me. Our Instagram is Happy Valley Nutrition. I love talking to people, answering questions. And we're based out of Massachusetts, but we see people everywhere. We're an insurance-based practice. Most people don't know that you could use your insurance to see a dietitian if they're enrolled in the insurance companies. So I always think if you want to explore the body story a little bit, or like just get everything that we talked about like out, just again, working with a mental health counselor or a dietitian that understands more of the psychology piece around food can be helpful.
I like you said explore the body story. That's a fascinating one where the chapters just keep right on unfolding, don't they?
They sure do. Sometimes I wish I could like move forward a couple pages or move backwards a couple chapters, but we are where we are, and that's all that we can do. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing us this new insights about way to eating and to love our body, regardless of our diagnosis or regardless of what's going on with it, to be able to stay in the moment and really enjoy our life. So thank you so much. That's Amanda Mittman from Happy Valley Nutrition. Everyone, have a great week, whatever your adventures, and join me next week for a brand new episode. Enjoy.